priestess by the lovely name of Jezebel. Here was a king of Israel, God's nation. He goes out and goes to the Baal worship temple and marries a princess named Jezebel. Now, Elijah became the focus point of Jezebel's anger. And she hated Elijah because he represented God and was not afraid to tell Jezebel where she could go. Elijah wanted to call the country back to God. And so he said, look, you're all out there worshiping Baal, and that's wrong, and I want to charge you to a contest. Okay, sounds good. And so he calls for a confirmation of 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of idols, and they come to Mount Carmel. They were to kill an ox and to lay it on wood. Chapter 18 and verse 24, I believe. 1 Kings 18, 24. Do you have it there? Have you found it? Where are you at, guys? Look with me, so I'm not cheating. Hello? 1 Kings 18, I'm reading out of the New American Standard English.
I got it.
Then you call, here's what it says. Then you guys call on the names of your God, little g. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call on the name of my God and my Lord, who answers by fire. He is God. And all the people said, you know, that really is an excellent idea. I don't know what language is that. I don't know what I think it's wisdom translations. So the prophets of Baal call out to God and cut themselves as Elijah mocked them. Then, when nothing happened, they called out and nothing happened. They were wondering, why didn't it happen? So Elijah turns, it's his turn, and he had everything. He said, here's what I'm going to do. I want you to soak it. Just soak it with as much water as you can. It hadn't rained many, but soak that ox just as wet as it can be. Let's just make sure it's a real good thing. And he soak it. And he called on God, and fire came down and burnt up the water, burnt up the altar, burnt up the sacrifice, and it burned everything in sight. That must have been a sight. Look at verse 38 and 39 of chapter 18. And when the people saw it, they fell on their face and said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. God never performed a miracle unless He was to be glorified. You remember when Pharaoh, it was Herod, that couldn't wait for Jesus to come to his court because he wanted Jesus to perform one of his miracles. And when he came, Jesus says, I'm not here to perform a miracle for your entertainment. I only do miracles so that God will be glorified and not you. So he did perform any miracles. Then Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let any of them escape. So all the 450 prophets went down into a place, a brook, and Elijah brought them down into the brook Kishon, and he then slew them. I don't know how he did that. I don't know how he killed 450 prophets. Did he have a machine gun, Bill? I don't know. He could have. He actually
Two-edged sword.
He must have had a two-edged sword. He must have had something. Who else killed a lot of people with his one hand? Ask the jawbone. Samson. He killed 1,000. Heck, 450 is not much for a prophet of God. Right? Wow. This was an incredible victory. But notice what happened after the victory. Chapter 19. Now Ahab took Jezebel. Oh my goodness. Jezebel can get the word on it. And all had told all that Elisha had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elisha and said, "So may the gods do to me even more if I do not make your life a life of one of sorrow." He said, "By tomorrow your life is going to be a pitiful case. Because of what you did to my prophets Baal, I'm going to make your life miserable. I'm going to set out and make your life miserable." Notice, and Elisha was afraid, and left his servant there. He rose and ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and was left his servant there. He came and sat under a juniper tree. He's way out in the desert, and he requests that he should die. He said, "I've had it. That's enough. Take my life. Just get me out of here." Elijah was very depressed. Yeah. So God had to provide him with food to eat. And he goes to Horeb, the mountain of God, and once there, he goes in a cave. And God says to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Well, God knew what he was doing there, but he wanted Elijah to know what he was doing there. And Elijah responded, is what Paul quotes in 11:3. So Paul enjoyed reading about the life of Elijah. And the lives of the people in the Old Testament were for our example. Now, I'm not sure when you get to heaven that you should go over to Elijah and say, "Elijah, I understand one day you got under the Jupiter tree. Why did you do that for?" He said, "Would you please? I don't want to talk about it." There's some things that we don't want to talk about when we do stupid things, right? Well, Paul put it in the scriptures for everybody to read for this 2,000 years. Isn't that nice of you? I wonder if Elijah got to heaven and said, "Paul, why did you tell that story about me? And then why was it told in 1 Kings in the first place, and you come around another 1,000 years and tell it again?" So that people that hear it will know that I'm not going to reject them. And he said in 1 Kings 19:10, he said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I am alone, and they seek my life to take it away." Boo-hoo. Aren't you waiting to see what God would say to him? Are you always, "Lord, I'm the only one in this city that loves God"? I wonder what God would say to you if you said such a thing like that. Look at verse 4. But what is the divine response? What is the word? It says, and here in the King James it says, "Here's the answer from the Lord." Now, I like the word answer. In its original, it means a divine response. He just didn't give an answer. He gave a divine response, right? A very interesting. It's a very unusual word. The word in the Greek, and basically means a divine oracle or word, so that it's not just an answer that a man could give. There are some answers that man just cannot give that is right. Only God can give the right answer to the right problem. It is a divine answer. So what was the divine word from God? If God gives a word, guess what? It is a divine word. What was the authoritative revelation of God? Here's what God said. God knew who was all the way around Elisha and Elijah. God knows all the circumstances that were around Elijah in that day. And he said, and God said, you're not the only one left. There are 7,000 men who are worshipers of God that have not gone into apostasy and out of worship. God knows all who are around us. And though it may seem we're the only church preaching the gospel, guess what? There are lots of people that God has got who love God's word as you and I do. They had not been given over to adultery. Even though Israel had rejected God, he had kept for himself how many people? 7,000, right? Who had not given themselves to adultery. The word kept intensifies the divine action. God did the keeping. What receives prominence here is the phrase, I have left to myself. I don't know if it's in the King James, but I have left to myself a remnant of people. I have left to myself. Here's what that means. God just doesn't decide to leave a few for the sake of leaving a few. He leaves a few for himself, that they who he leaves will bring glory to him. God just doesn't save you because he likes you. He keeps us around as saints in order that we may glorify him. For myself, in other words, for his glory, for his purpose, for his honor, for his delight, God keeps those 7,000 from among the hundreds of thousands of Israel whose hearts were hardened and who was given to adultery. The world may be going to hell, we say. You might have said it. The world is going to hell in a basket. Have you ever said that phrase? I heard that phrase. That may be true. Out of the hundreds of billions of people on this world, 8 billion people on this world, but guess what? He's got us. He's got you and I. He has still some people left for the purpose of his glory. The point Paul is making is that even during one of the worst periods of apostasy, Israel was in its lowest state of going against God. In the very depth of the wickedness of that time, God still has his people. I've heard people say, I wouldn't want to raise my kids in this wicked generation. Let me tell you something. God still has his people in a wicked and perverse generation. And Paul's point is, in Israel's history, God still has preserved a remnant for himself who remains faithful to him and his covenant. It was a time of famine, so the pressure for the Israelites to worship Baal, Israel was having it so bad, and things were so bad that they were being withheld their due. They couldn't get a job. They couldn't have food. When they had crops, they would come against it. To be a true believer in those days of Elijah was the greatest hardship that any person could have. And so many of them were so destitute and so desperate, they joined in